The Luminous Mind, Episode 12.
If you try and push them along the same route as everybody else, then again, you're right, it takes away that love of doing something, whether it's repairing cars or researching mythology, or it doesn't matter what it is.
Benjamin Franklin once said, "Do not curse the darkness, rather light a candle instead." If you're ready to set your mind on fire, then prepare yourself for the Luminous Mind with your host, Rebecca Bowman.
Today's fire starter is Mary Kate. She's 23 from Tampa, Florida. She's been homeschooled from the second grade through high school. She has a Bachelor's of Science degree in Forensic Anthropology from Western Carolina University. Currently, she's working on her master's degree in Anatomy and Forensic Anthropology at the University of Dundee in Scotland. Thank you, Mary Kate. I think this is the first time we've had a full-time homeschooler. Would you briefly tell us about yourself, where you're from, and hobbies, passions that you have, and what you're doing with your schooling?
All right. Well, I'm originally from North Carolina, although for the last 10 years I've been living in Tampa, Florida. And let's see, I'm 23, and I was homeschooled from about the second grade all the way through high school, so had a nice chunk of experience there. And let's see, at the moment I hold a Bachelor's of Science in Forensic Anthropology, and I'm currently working on my Master's of Science in Anatomy and Forensic Anthropology at the University of Dundee in Scotland.
Oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah, lots more going on.
That's great. So you said you started homeschooling when you were second grade. Do you know why your parents chose to start homeschooling you then?
Yes, actually. At the time, we were living in Mississippi, and I think it was in first grade. They did, the school board did IQ tests of, I think, several different students in school who seemed to do very well and seemed to be gifted. And apparently I scored fairly high, and they were going to take me out and put me into an advanced class. And when they were telling my parents about this, they couldn't really give them a good description of what the classes were going to be like. They kind of gave this very vague description saying, oh, we kind of let the kids lead the class. And my parents kind of looked at each other and said, not with 5-year-olds, you don't. So they decided to pull me out and homeschool me, and we were lucky in that where we were right outside of Jackson, Mississippi. We had access to a homeschool support group as well. So it was a good way for us to get started, so that my mom had a nice support group that she could kind of bounce ideas off of and figure out, okay, how do we make this work? So that was pretty much why they pulled me out, and it's ended up working out very, very well.
Great. So do you know what kind of educational philosophy and maybe the curriculum that you were using?
We didn't ever use a very specific curriculum that I remember. I remember it was mostly kind of a sort of piecemeal, like Mom would find out whatever seemed to work for a particular subject. So like I remember we had this one English book that I used for spelling tests. There was a different set of books that we used for other aspects of English and vocabulary, and I know we used the Saxon math curriculum books. Those were really, really useful. So she kind of operated more from a flexible perspective of, okay, you'll try this out for a little while, and if it doesn't work, then we switch to something else and see how we go. So it actually ended up working out very well, that flexibility, because it meant we could always change things up if things weren't working out.
Maybe customize it for you, obviously.
Yeah.
So, and that was a benefit. So how did you feel about being pulled out of school and homeschooled? And then kind of tell me how that felt at the beginning, and then how you ended up feeling about it kind of over time.
See, well, I remember when I started it, I remember being a little disappointed because obviously I wouldn't be seeing my friends anymore. But once I got started, because we started off with a homeschool group, I was able to make some new friends at that time, and that really kind of helped soften the blow, so to speak. And I ended up having so much fun with that group that I quickly forgot missing public school. And as we went along with it, I greatly enjoyed it, mostly because for us, it offered a whole new world of freedom. to go along with it. Because certainly during the day we weren't quite as structured as a normal public school day would be. So, I mean, obviously, usually in the morning, we'd have, she'd tell me to do this math lesson, we're going to do this spelling test, and do these pages in these workbooks, and then you're done for the day. And it meant that we could go and do so much more during the days, and basically everything became a learning experience. So as we went along, I came to really, really enjoy it. And I remember a couple of times my parents asked me at certain periods, do you want to go back to public school? And every time I told them, nope, I'm happy where I am.
Oh, great. So do you feel like all the free time and the field trips that you had were beneficial to you more so than just sitting in a classroom?
Oh, definitely. And I think homeschooling really ended up working perfectly for our family because my dad was in the military at the time. And so we were moving about every 2.5 years. And being homeschooled made it so much easier. I never had to worry. After a while, I didn't have to worry about that whole problem of, okay, you're starting at a new school, got to make new friends, and then once you have friends, you're up and gone again and have to start the process over.
And then not to mention every school's at a different place, and so, you would be either behind or ahead or,
Exactly. It made things more regular in a very non-regular life. And also, because we had that extra free time and everything, what we started doing, every place that we moved to, because my mom was stay-at-home for me to help along with this, we started going and doing every historical and educational thing that our new place had to offer. So we would go during the day, like there might be a historical home close by. We'd go do that. Or if there were any museums nearby, we'd go and tour those and just things like that. And even simple, like, everyday things that we would have to do. Like, okay, so we're moving into a new house and we're going to paint the kitchen or something. And my mom would get me to help her out with that. And so I also learned tons of very practical things as well. It really worked out perfectly.
A lot of life skills. Do you feel like learning life skills like that helped you later in your life?
Oh, certainly. It's made several of the moves later on a lot easier because I knew how to do a lot of things. Because from all that moving, I started learning a lot of those practical things, like even stuff like learning how to replace a sink faucet or put up a ceiling fan or something like that. So that practical experience was really, really beneficial. And it helped me a lot too, especially like once I got to college and everything else, when you might have something like that happen or something breaks and your friends don't really know what to do. And you're like, oh, I got this. Let's get this done.
That's awesome. So how do you think it prepared you? Do you feel like homeschooling prepared you better for the future than maybe attending a traditional school? I mean, obviously you've had roommates and stuff like that, and you can kind of look, I mean, not that we want to judge ourselves by them, but at the same time, do you feel like you were sufficiently prepared for like college and stuff like that?
I think so, yes. I mean, having that extra practical bit really helped a lot with some of the things that you don't realize you're going to have to do once you start college. So having that really helped. And to the educational background, I feel like I learned a lot more than doing homeschooling than I might have if I'd been in public school. And it made learning a lot more fun as well, which I think is really the most important part, is that it took it from being the daily grind of, okay, I have to get up, have to go to school, have to do all this homework, to it really made me enjoy learning about things and it made it a lot easier for me to go and do stuff on my own.
Yeah. Well, and maybe being able to experience things made the learning come alive. It wasn't just like in a textbook type thing. It was like things you had done and seen.
Exactly. There was that really big practical part to it. So you could say, okay, like we might do, say, a gardening experiment or something, and the pea plant in the box type thing to show how plants go for sunlight, and being able to see it firsthand, not just reading it out of a book, really helped a lot.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you the big socialization question that all homeschoolers get. What are your thoughts about socialization? And I mean, you talked about being part of a co-op, which is really important, but what are your overall thoughts about socialization, and how do you think you socialized yourself as a homeschooler?
Well, first off, I think socialization is extremely important. There are no words really to say just how important that is. And for myself, I got socialized a bunch anyway. Even for those first couple years when I was in public school, my parents tried to make sure they got me out and around other people and everything, so I would be well socialized.
Yeah.
And
maybe we'll call it networking,
Yeah, and
networking.
Exactly. And we did it in a lot of different ways. I mean, in a couple of the places we lived, because as I mentioned, we're moving around a lot during all of this. A couple of places we lived, we had homeschool groups, different co-ops. Some places we didn't. And whenever we did have a group like that local, we did all sorts of things with them. I remember there was a group we belonged to in Virginia that at the time when we were there, I was part of the bowling league. I was part of the Shakespeare Club. I would go on the different field trips they'd organized. I did all sorts of stuff with them. So there was that, and then, getting out and doing our normal stuff. Like I said, doing the museum trips or historical things like that. That was another good way to socialize because my mom has never been a quiet person, so we would always start talking to people or talk to tour guides or museum staff or whatnot. So there was that. And also I learned violin growing up as well. So having that was another good outlet to do something and get out around people.
Yeah. Well, and do you feel, to kind of go on with that socialization thing, do you feel like you learned some really good social skills just from your mom? I'm convinced that, things that I watch, if I see a shy homeschooled kid, it's because his parents are shy. It's not necessarily because they don't have him out and around. It's just his parents aren't extremely social. It sounds like your mother, she was a really great model and mentor for being a social person.
Oh, yes, she definitely was and is today. It's very much, although I don't also really think of myself as a very shy person, even back from when I was little. But, I think seeing how she very easily interacted with everybody and she has a very easy friendliness about her, too. So that was a good model, I guess you could say, and something that I've always tried to emulate. And I find it makes it a lot easier when you're out in whatever kind of social situation, whether it's formal or informal, just being able to have that manner and be comfortable with yourself around other people is hugely beneficial. So I think that's definitely a very important thing for homeschoolers. And it's definitely something that I can tell the difference with when I've met other homeschoolers my age, especially once I got into college. I knew two others who had been homeschooled, and you could tell between the three of us who had been socialized a little bit more, because while the other two were very, very smart, did extremely well. One of them actually started in college at 16.
Wow.
But she, bless her heart, she was very sweet, but she was very socially awkward, and you could tell it took her a little while to get used to being around people, and sometimes you could tell she was a little nervous because she would speak very, very fast when you would talk to her. But she eventually broke out of it while we were there together. I remember seeing her again like a couple years in after freshman year, and she was much, much better. You can definitely tell when a homeschooled person has had more socialization and whatnot. So it is a very, very important thing.
Great. So as a homeschooler, what are some of the biggest obstacles you face? And then maybe tell us how you learned from those obstacles.
Actually, I don't really remember having any big obstacles or problems going along through this whole thing. I think probably the biggest obstacle, I guess you could say, was once I got to be about high school age. Once you get to that point, at least where we were in Florida, there didn't seem to be there weren't a lot of homeschool groups, and even when you did find them, it was a more normal thing that the homeschool age kids just didn't do much with the groups or with each other. So for some reason, like everybody kind of closed off. So at that point, it was a lot harder to find friends. For that one, I just went along without and managed to do okay. One of the things I do remember being very useful, I wouldn't necessarily say it was an obstacle, but again, during that time frame, I hadn't really done a lot of essay writing. So what we did was, in the state of Florida, you can do dual enrollment classes at your local college for free if you're a high school.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we took advantage of that, and I took 2 different classes at the local community college, one of them being an English class. Thought, okay, I'm getting ready to go to real college soon. I want to make sure that I can be up to par with what's expected of me in a regular college class. So I took, that was a basic level 1 English composition, and I took an anthropology class just for something fun. And that really, really helped a lot, just to kind of as a transition from homeschooling to the regular college system. So, and it was one of those, I discussed it with my parents, and they said, don't worry about trying to have the best grade ever. Just think of it as this is a trial run.
Great. And how did you do in that?
Actually, I did pretty well. I managed to get an A in one and a B in the other class. So it was...
Oh, that is well.
It was a good base, and it really helped me a lot, especially with the writing, because that's something that I have never liked, even though I'm told I'm fairly good at it. It's just, I've never liked having to write anything at all, even when it's something I like. It's just, I don't know, just something about it I've never enjoyed. But having that class really helped me at least be more comfortable with the mechanics of it. So
Great.
It was definitely a good thing.
So did you have any discouragement or bad days as a homeschooler, and how did you combat that?
Let's see. I don't really remember having too many bad days, as you might say.
Lonely days?
Yeah, lonely days probably more. Can remember having more of those. But I think, honestly, it was something that I kind of got used to as I was growing up. And like I said, some places we would have homeschool groups, and I had lots of friends, and it wasn't so bad. But also, very much so, my mom she's always been my best friend going through this whole process. So I guess I didn't often feel that lonely. I think that became more prevalent once I got to the teenage years. But even then, really, it wasn't too terribly bad. Something that if I just got lonely, I could either talk to Mom about it, or I would talk to my uncle a lot. He's always been one of my buddies. So there's different things like that to combat it. And then, too, I read a lot. That was kind of my way of comforting myself and whatnot, is just being able to escape into a good book.
That's awesome.
So we're going to take a break here, and when we come back, we'll learn more about Mary Kate's successes.
If you would like to see your business grow, then contact us at The Luminous Mind for advertising space on theluminousmind.net or on the podcast, The Luminous Mind Podcast.
Welcome back.
So we talked about obstacles and discouragement that we had and how to combat some of those things, but what are some successes that you've seen being homeschooled?
Well, actually, I remember one of the biggest successes I had was when we were in Virginia. And in Virginia, pretty much they'll let you homeschool and do what you like, but every year you are supposed to take a standardized test to kind of make sure that you're at the level that they think you should be. And I remember one year taking the test, and it was almost like an SAT. It had a ton of different parts to it with different subjects, and I remember being really pleased when I got my scores back, and one of the sections was on map reading, like just normal street map type thing, and can you read directions and follow them and that sort of thing. And my score said that I had gotten a college level grade on it, and I think I was 13 at the time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I remember being really, really pleased with that.
So maybe being able to travel around a little more as a homeschooler with all those field trips helped with that sort of subject. So.
Oh, yeah, it definitely did, because especially since I really learned to read a road map when we were living in Miami, which Miami is an interesting town in that it has 4 First Streets. It's kind of arranged like a grid with 4 of everything, so you very quickly learn whether you need to be on North First Street or South First Street.
Great. Are there any other successes? I mean, when you got to college, was it a difficult transition to go? I mean, you talked about a community college that you did fairly well in, but what about like the standard university? Did you see successes there?
Oh, definitely. I was very pleased with myself that I managed to do very well. I ended up going to Western Carolina University in Western North Carolina, and I guess my grades were good enough that they accepted me into their honors college when I started, and so I was very pleased with that. and it was one of those things I managed to go through the whole time, and I made straight A's, and I never really remember having too much trouble. Like those first couple of community college classes really helped to at least get me prepared for it. And so after that first week when I was there, when I was really nervous about everything, I was totally fine. I did really well. And something I do remember, though, is that every now and then, of course, the start of a class, a professor would go around asking everybody's names, and sometimes they'd ask a couple facts about you. And whenever I would say that I had been homeschooled, they always seemed extremely surprised and like, "Oh, wow, you were. You're so well adjusted." So, like, every now and then, it's like it was a compliment and sometimes not really a compliment. It's like, yeah, there's some of us that might have some trouble, but come on, we're not all maladjusted. Come on now. So.
Well, and that's kind of a misconception or a stereotype of homeschoolers, that we are all kind of weird and backward. So what are some personal habits as a homeschooler that help make you successful?
Let's see. Well, I think probably a big one, or I don't know if you'd say it was a habit or not, but I've always loved reading. So that really helped a lot. It made it a lot easier to go through and do things, because once you reach a certain point, there's not much you can do with workbooks, and so a lot of it just becomes reading on your own, and that always helped a lot, that sort of thing. And the ability to be flexible, I think, of not getting really, really flustered when I didn't do something as well. So just kind of having, I guess, the patience to be able to go, okay, I'm having a little trouble with this, let's take a deep breath and maybe try it from a different angle and see if that does better. So kind of having that, and I guess a little bit of stubbornness too, of thinking, okay, I am not going to fail. I am going to do well.
And do you think, you talked about being able to do lots of reading, do you feel like as a homeschooler you were able to read more? You said there was more free time.
Yeah, I definitely think I got to read a lot more, and it was nice too because it was never required reading, which is something I have always despised. I guess, again, it's that stubbornness in me. I may want to read the particular book that you're giving me to read, but I want to read it in my own time rather than say, okay, read this book by the next Thursday or something.
And then do a report on it and all that.
Exactly. It took the fun out of reading, whereas being able to do it on my own and then just spontaneously talking about it afterwards, you're doing the exact same thing as a required reading project, but you're having more fun with it. And encourages you to keep going with things like that, which is, I think, really important, especially if your child is particularly stubborn about reading. Is things like that, to try and make it more fun, are always going to help more than just saying, okay, you're going to read this.
Great. So you talked about having a close relationship with your mom. How do you think homeschooling benefited your family? Do you think that it helped create a closeness for you?
Yes, I definitely think it did, and it was, as I said, pretty much throughout this whole process, my mom ended up becoming like my best friend, and we're, even now, I mean, we're like, everyone calls us the partners in crime because we do so much together, and I think it also made it a lot easier going through the teenage years because I didn't have that rebellious craziness where for some reason you turn 13 and you suddenly hate your mother and you just start going crazy. I think because I'd had that homeschooling and because I was already so close with my mom and my dad as well, I didn't feel the need to have that rebellious phase, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, and we talked about, me and my co-op, we actually have talked a lot about that there's a difference between a teenager and a youth. And sometimes homeschooling ends up producing a youth that is striving to take on the responsibilities of adulthood versus having to rebel against that and, trying to find your own way. You were trying to use those mentors versus trying to rebel against them. So
yeah, I think that definitely is a good point to make.
So what is one thing that you're doing that you're most excited about now? And can you tell us about like your long-term goals?
Sure. Well, right now, probably the thing I'm most excited about is, as I said, I'm in the middle of working on my master's degree, and I've just gotten my thesis approved, so I'm getting excited to get started on that. And I guess what's really exciting about this, too, is that not only am I doing a master's, but I got lucky enough in that I'm doing my master's in another country. And
that is amazing.
Yeah,
Has that been an amazing experience? Tell us about what it's like living in Scotland.
It's very different. It's one of those things that you think, okay, because it's the UK and because everybody still speaks English and that things are fairly similar, you think that it's not going to be too bad. But there's some days where things are so confusing because you think it's going to be one this way and it's completely different. So like one of the big examples is language, in that we use the same words, but a lot of times those words mean very different things over here. So like the whole thing of chips versus fries is always amusing. So just like simple everyday things like that can sometimes be an adventure. But I've definitely had an absolute blast over here so far. I've just finished up my first semester. And one of the somewhat intimidating things about this program is that normal master's degree in the States, it's a 2-year program. Over here in the UK, every master's degree is 1 year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's a lot more intense because you're cramming in so much information into just 1 year. And mine especially, because part of mine is human gross anatomy. And
oh, wow.
just that class alone takes up an amazing amount of time because we have 3 hours of lecture every week and 9 hours a week in the dissection room. So
wow.
That's very, very intense.
Yeah. So what a great learning experience, though, for somebody.
Oh, yeah. Really, I cannot say just how invaluable this is going to be and is to me. It's just been so cool.
That's awesome. So what advice or encouragement would you give somebody who's just starting out homeschooling?
Let's see. Advice probably I think would be to, if you can find a homeschool co-op or support group, sometimes that can be the most valuable thing you have, is just knowing that there's somebody else out there that's going through the same thing that you are. And two, the possibility of being able to have those friends for your children as you're starting, that's really, really important. And I think just try to be patient and don't let yourself get frustrated too easily, because sometimes it does take a while to kind of get your rhythm as a homeschooler. And you may have to try a bunch of different things before you figure out what works best for you and your child. Because everybody learns differently, and I think once you figure out how your child learns best and how they enjoy learning best, then once you figure that out, everything really becomes so much easier, because then you can go, okay, say you're sitting there going, okay, my child is a more tactile learner, so they have to do things with their hands. They have to get in there and do it practically to learn the best. So once you figure that out, then you can start looking for really good ways of giving certain lessons in that way so that they catch on much faster.
And make it very customized for them.
Exactly. I think that's probably the best thing about homeschooling is that you can really customize your learning experience to your own preferences, and it makes it a lot easier to deal with some things that don't necessarily fall into that preference, because there's some things, like for the tactile learners, sometimes it's really hard to find things like, okay, how do you tactily learn a math lesson? But it also, it spawns a lot of creativity, I think, in trying to figure out what's going to work best. And I think that's really, really important, having that aspect as well, and that if you can really start to foster those creative leanings and everything.
That's really great. So do you have a favorite book or resource that you want to share with us?
Let's see. Well, I think for specific resource, the Saxon math textbooks were really, really useful. I remember because they were very easy to read as a child going through each grade, and that they explained concepts very, very well, and you had a workbook set of problems to go through, and they would have the answers in the back of the book. So if you ever got stuck on something, you didn't have to worry about going, okay, how do I ever know if I got this right or not?
Yeah, exactly.
And they go all the way through from kindergarten level to, they had calculus, I remember doing. And again, even though it was very complicated math, they explained everything just really, really well, and it was a very nice and easy system to do. Even for someone who's not really good at math, you can do well using those.
That's great.
So I think for a specific resource, that one was really good. And I think just don't be afraid to use a bunch of different things. Like I said, I mean, I remember when I was starting off, one of the things we would do is like I'd have a couple of books that we'd use, I'd have workbooks, and we'd do practical stuff, and then I did also a lot of things on the computer. I can remember using, I think it was the Walt Disney Lion King typing program. That was really fun, and I learned very quickly how to type using that.
Well, and with the internet, there's so many resources there that there's no point in not using technology. So
exactly. I mean, there's just so much you can use, and just things like that. And then one series of books, too, I would suggest for if parents are having trouble with their kids getting them into reading on certain things like history or whatnot. You can be a little sneaky when you're trying to teach them mythology and get them to read the books by Rick Riordan, his Percy Jackson series.
Oh, yeah.
Those are wonderful books because he puts so much real mythology fact into all of those books. And I thought myself to have a pretty good knowledge of mythology when I first read these as a teenager. And as I'm going through, I'm going, ooh, I didn't know about that. What's this? Let's look this up. So it's a good way to kind of sneakily get them into things like that.
That's great. My boys and teens love those books too, so I will back that up. What changes would you like to see in the world in the future?
Changes. Well, I don't know. I think probably just more a focus on quality learning rather than teaching towards the test, as so much of public school is nowadays. And two, I think a big thing is that you also have to be able to realize if a person or a child is just simply not meant for academia. That's something I found a lot once I got to college, is that some people, they may be very smart people, but they may just not be meant for a college career. Sometimes, rather than going on higher into academia, you have to go to something more practical. And I think at the moment our culture is very much frowning on that, which is, again, not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that sometimes it's just not for you. Like, really nowadays everybody's pushing so hard to make sure everybody goes to college, and that it's sort of kind of cheapening having a college degree. So
yeah. And it takes away a person's passion when they're just doing something because everyone else is doing it. It takes away their drive and what they're meant to do in the world. You know, I believe everybody's got something that, like a talent, a God-given talent basically, and they need to find that and then really work towards that instead of following the crowd.
Exactly.
Is that what you would?
Yeah, I think that's definitely really a good point. Is just that if you try and push them along the same route as everybody else, then again, you're right. It takes away that love of doing something, whether it's repairing cars or researching mythology, or it doesn't matter what it is. But you really have to make sure that you foster that and that you encourage them to do that, no matter what it happens to be. I think that's really the most important part, is making sure that, making sure they have the education necessary, but making sure that they're happy as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's definitely something to be careful of.
So before we say goodbye to you, is there any parting words that you want to share with us, or maybe a favorite quote that you like?
Let's see. Well, I think I got a good quote. This one's actually from Thomas Jefferson. It's, "I believe in good luck, but I believe that the harder I work, the more I have of it."
That's awesome.
That's something I've found to be very, very true. That hard work definitely pays off. So
that's great. I love that. So thank you so much for joining us, Mary Kate, and we really wish you the best of luck in the future. It sounds like you're going to go on and do some amazing things.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. Isn't it fun listening to successful homeschoolers like Mary Kate? If you want to join her, please go to our website, theluminousmind.net. Click on the Fire tab and schedule a time today. Also, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Google+, subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as iTunes and Stitcher. Help us change the paradigm of education by lighting minds on fire.